everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lucy and today I'm joined by the amazing Alwyn Hamilton. I'm really excited that you're joining me. Alwyn is the author of these beautiful books behind us, so Rebel of the Sands, Traitor to the Throne and Hero at the Fall, which is brand new. And in all of its shiny foily glory.
I know, isn't it pretty?
It's stunning. Like, whoever designed your covers,
yes,
bit of a genius, not gonna lie.
They're so great. They were originally designed, they've been designed by a couple of people. Will Steele is one of them, and the first time I was called into the offices to see a finished version, I'm like, "Here's the finished version," and I just had it, and like, my editor was trying to explain to me what they'd done on you know, the technical things, and literally all I heard was because I was going,
sparkling.
Shiny.
And Hero at the Fall is the final book in the series, and it's out now. What was it like to round off this series? Because you know, it's your debut series.
Yeah, it was really satisfying on a personal level to know that I was able to do it, because I've talked about this a little bit before. I wrote 6 whole books before writing Rebel of the Sands, all of which were sort of series starters in some way or another. So by the time I got to Rebel, I knew how to write a first book. And then, you know, I finally had written a first book that I was happy with and that was good enough to go out as a published book. And then I had to write a second book, and I was like, oh, I haven't done this 6 times. I've done the other things 6 times, but I don't know that I know how to write a second and third book. So it was a completely new experience with the second book to, you know, build off characters I'd already created and make sure I used the mythology from the first one. And then similarly, writing a third book, I was like, all right, this is a whole new experience again, learning to tie off all those threads and things. So I was really, you know, proud of myself. Not in a sort of obnoxious, like pat myself on the back way, but like
totally.
I felt very accomplished because I was doing something completely different.
You mentioned the mythology.
Yes.
So it's a really clever blend of Arabian Nights, but also kind of like the Wild West. And what made you kind of like combine these two quite different settings and cultures almost? Yeah,
I mean, the original idea was pure Western. It was. It started off with the idea of a young female sharpshooter because I'd seen something online that was really obnoxious. I can't even remember exactly what it was. It was basically saying how this person was annoyed in fantasy books when women use the same weapons as men.
Oh right,
they were like because it's unrealistic. Girls shouldn't be wielding broadswords. They're just not as physically strong as men. And it was so patronizing. It was kind of trying to give all this advice, like, how about instead of giving them a broadsword, give them a thin rapier? Like, and it was just like, I'm not sexist. It's just biology. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Especially in a fantasy book where there's magic that's a completely like equal non-strength based thing. So I thought, I'm going to write something that is completely a non-strength based weapon in the hand of a young girl, a gun. And she immediately made sense to me in sort of a Wild West setting, but I knew I didn't want to write a straight Western. I didn't want to write something historical that really limits you in terms of the scope of the epicness of what you can do. So I sort of like kept playing with what else it could be, and I was working in Oriental rugs and carpets and Islamic art at the time at an auction house, and it sort of struck me in the middle of the night as I was trying to fall asleep. I was like, Wild West meets the Arabian Nights. It makes sense. It's desert settings and bandits and, you know, and a strong place of religion and, you know, both like very mythologized in movies in the beginning of the 20th century, so they have all these kind of similar ethos to them, and so I just kind of talked myself into it at midnight.
You mentioned research, and obviously this is kind of rooted in Arabian mythology, especially with the genies. What was that like, that research process, and how kind of strict were you with sticking to stuff?
With anything that is myth, you can kind of take your own bend on it. I definitely wanted to use some of the stuff that is traditionally associated just with jinn, and I read a lot of folk tales of that sort of part of the world, and they're all a little bit vague because, you know, the borders that we have today are not the borders that they had in the day. So saying that something is a story from Iran or Persia, that's slightly different. So it's a little complicated. It's hard to pin down the stories to any specific place. There's a few great collections of stories that are translated by someone named Amina Shah. I always have to make sure I say Amina, not Amani, because it's a few letters apart, that are great. There's tales from the bazaar, tales from, like, you know, those that are great translations, which really are like folk tales. And you realize when you're reading them how similar they are to a lot of folk tales that you have, like in England, about fairies and, you know, changelings and all these things like that. So there's a little bit of that incorporated into the genie as well, things that, you know, we traditionally associate with with, you know, mythological creatures in the West as well, of like the aversion to iron and, you know, the not being able to tell a lie. And there's also, but there's, you know, that crosses over in that both of the mythological beings are sort of very trickstery in quite a lot of cultures. And there's a little bit of Greek gods in there as well, with having the children who are half human, half supernatural, and half power as a result of that. So it's a little bit of a mishmash, because there is sort of no right way about it. So there's, you know, the great and powerful genie, and then there's stories where it's like the genie lived among them and his mom was a genie, and like everyone was chill about that. And sometimes when he needed her, he rubbed this magic ring and she'd come and bail him out of a situation when he was on an adventure. So there's a real mix of how they're represented depending on the story.
So Amani is, as I said, like an incredible heroine, really badass, but also very kind of like sassy and smart. Was she inspired by anyone?
Not really, but no, she sort of started out as, I mentioned earlier I wrote 6 books before Rebel, and the one right before Rebel was like, it was almost right. I could sort of feel it. I was like, this is almost the right book. And the thing that was wrong with it, which I realized retrospectively having written Rebel, is that I was way too preoccupied with the plot and the world, and not enough with her as a character, with my main character. And it was driving me absolutely crazy, and I took a break from it. I was just like, I'm gonna put this to one side, I'm gonna take a break from it and write the beginning of this idea that I had, which was Rebel. And the first line has pretty much remained unchanged in Rebel, and that's the first line that sort of sums up Amani as a character. And all of a sudden with one line I knew exactly who she was, what she wanted, what she would do to get it, like all these things that I hadn't really articulated very well for the previous character. So
it
she
all
was
started with Amani.
Yes, it really did. And it was just one of those click moments of, the first line of the book is something along the lines of, was they said the only people who belonged in Deadshot After Dark were the people who were up to no good. I wasn't up to no good, but I wasn't exactly up to no bad either. That has pretty much remained the first line forever. That's the first line I wrote. And just in that line, in the line I knew who she was. I knew she's like, she's not trying to get in trouble, but she's gonna get in trouble, you know, kind of thing. And so she really drove the story through. So anytime I was stuck, I just thought, okay, what would she do? And then follow that.
Writing fantasy, obviously, you've written this incredible fantasy series.
Yes.
What would be your tips on how to write fantasy for anyone out there who wants to write a fantasy novel?
Okay, so if you have a magic system, I would say articulate it so that it makes sense to you and to your reader. I find it very frustrating both as a writer and as a reader to not know what the limitations are or where it comes from, because if suddenly, you know, it can be like, I control the wind, but I also control the sea. I'm like, where did that come from? I'm so confused. For me, what really helps with that is to come up with an origin story for the magic, and that grounds it. So like mine is that, you know, humans were created out of the 4 elements, and so as a result, that ties back to, every bit of magic ties back to the elements in some way. No one's power is going to wind up being, you know, like something completely out there. Make your world bigger than it is on the page. I've said this a million times, but I'm pretty much Hemingway refers to it as the Iceberg Effect, which is like what your book is above the water, and then you know a ton that's below it. And that really fleshes out your world, I think, and it's little simple things like, if, you know, they're trying on a dress and it's made of silk, and this is not a country that would naturally produce silk, then you should probably know where that silk comes from. It didn't just appear, or maybe it did just appear out of thin air. It was magicked out of thin air. But know that, or know what your equivalent of China that's producing silk in. Does it ship it in? Because otherwise, you know, if you're writing something and it doesn't make any sense for her to be having a silk dress, that's going to be a little bit weird. And you don't have to do that ahead of time. Like, I know some people who will go ahead of time and like way over prepare, and that works for them. But for me, it works out that, you know, they'll be walking and I'll think like, oh, they need to encounter some sort of, you know, forest here. What would that forest contain? And then sort of figure it out as I go.
What are your top fantasy book recommendations? Because we all want to know, if we loved Rebel of the Sands, what are we going to love next?
Oh, so many things. One of my number one fantasy recommendations is actually a fantasy that doesn't have any magic in it. So
I like those.
It's a weird, I still would refer to it as a fantasy. But it's The Winter's Curse series by Marie Kowski.
See, I've heard so many things about this book series, but I've never read
it. Here's how I always pitch this book.
Do you know what? I think I actually...
Was it from me?
It was from you, because I read an article you did for the US about if you enjoy Raylo.
Yes!
What books would you recommend? I am like so obsessed with Raylo.
I think it was because it was sort of like enemies
Enemies of
sexual tension. If you ship
perfect.
it, you'll love it. But yeah, I almost never sort of get into telling people what the book is about because it's so hard to sum up because it's so much about that book is so much about a feeling. But I always tell people how it made me feel to try to pitch it to them, which is that I started reading it at 9 p.m. on a work night and just thinking, I'll read a couple of chapters. I just got this book, read a few chapters of it. To lull myself to sleep. And then the next thing I knew it was 4 a.m. and I had rotated 180 degrees in my bed. I was at the other side of my bed because I just like thrashed with emotions to the other side of my bed. And I was just like, and I was finishing it at 4 a.m. and I was just like a wreck of just feelings and sheets all tangled together.
We've all been
Yeah, and I believe I out loud went, Kestrel, no! and then I just was really distressed. And at work the next day everyone was like, are you okay? Are you sick? Because I'd had about 3 hours of sleep. I just didn't sleep very well last night because I couldn't be like, I'm emotionally devastated.
Did you finish it all at night?
Finish it all in one night, yeah.
Oh my
it's
God.
fantastic.
Maybe I should start.
Just do it, yeah.
I've got
just
the
do
entire
it.
series on my shelf as well.
That is good because I had to wait for the second book.
Okay.
And the third book. And it was torture every single time. It was torture. Yeah, it was a lot.
Okay, you convinced me.
Definitely go for those. Those are wonderful, wonderful books. And another one that is probably a little bit harder to find because it's a little bit older, but it's one I read when I was a teenager, is The Blue Sword by Mckinley. Which is, I can definitely see the influence of that, having read as a child, on Rebel.
Yeah.
I think it might have been the first fantasy I read in a desert setting. But it's the first book I remember, A, with a desert setting, and B, reading about the heroine and how sort of controlled and badass she is in this really trying situation, and thinking, I want to be more like her.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? When you read about her, and you're like, oh, I wish I was like her.
And now, I know you're a big Taylor Swift fan.
Yeah.
Yes. I had to bring this up as a fellow Swiftie out there. If you could choose one Taylor Swift song to represent Hero at the Fall, what song would it be?
Ooh, okay, to represent Hero. I've got I Knew You Were Trouble
perfect.
for Rebel. Maybe Red.
Interesting.
Because it's red,
and
there's that's all about sort of a lot of emotions and how strong the emotions are. I think I Knew You Were Trouble kind of goes for the whole series.
And Bad Blood.
Yes, okay, alright, so I Knew You Were Trouble for Rebel, Bad Blood for Traitor, Red for Hero. That's my playlist.
Okay, deal. I approve those choices. And what are you working on next?
I can't talk too much about what I'm working on next.
Okay.
I am working on something.
Is it YA?
It is YA. It is fantasy.
Okay.
If you follow me on Twitter and see what I'm posting from Pinterest inspirations, you can probably figure out some stuff about it.
Amazing, I can't wait. And thank you for
so
joining
much.
me
This
today.
was so much fun.
That's all we have time for. But guys, Hero at the Fall is out now. It is the conclusion to the Rebel of the Sands trilogy. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.
Bye.